When the storms of life hit and the voices of critics surround you, where do you anchor your soul? Well, in this deep dive, we are going to find the answer to that very question. Welcome to the Pilgrim's Rest channel. Our purpose is to introduce spiritual books that have been passed down through the generations so that every saint walking the heavenly journey may find rest, nourishment, and renewed strength here. We are here to introduce Spurgeon's Treasury of David chapter by chapter. Today is Psalm 31.
Exactly. We're stepping right into the heart of a text that has, well, it's comforted people for centuries. It really is a profound text to explore.
It definitely is.
And what Charles Spurgeon points out early on in his commentary is the fascinating structure, or I guess you could call it the emotional landscape of this specific psalm. He describes it as a song of mingled measures.
Mingled measures, that's an interesting phrase.
Right. It doesn't just offer one continuous, unbroken note of triumphant joy. Instead, it kind of undulates. It falls into these incredibly deep valleys of intense mourning. And then, almost unexpectedly, it rises back up to these high hills of confidence.
Wow, that feels incredibly validating for the reality of the Christian experience.
It really does.
It tells you that not everything we express in worship has to be this pure, untroubled praise.
Absolutely. Those mournful songs, those raw expressions of grief, they're completely vital for our spiritual journey. I mean, you can't bypass the valleys to get to the hills.
Right, you have to go through them.
Exactly. And as we trace David's emotional journey through this psalm, we see exactly how he handles those massive shifts in elevation.
Well, let's start right at the beginning of that journey then. If you glance at the slide we have up for Psalm 31, verse 1, David makes a really definitive statement. He says, "In thee, O Lord, do I put my trust."
And notice how active and, frankly, desperate that statement actually is. This isn't a passive, abstract kind of hope where you just, cross your fingers and hope to the best.
Yeah, it sounds much firmer than that.
It is. Spurgeon uses a very specific phrase here. He calls it a fiducial grip. A grip of absolute reliance that just refuses to let go.
Wait, a fiducial grip? That sounds almost like a legal or financial term.
Yeah, it does sound like that.
So what does that actually mean for a person sitting at home right now who might be feeling completely overwhelmed by their circumstances?
Basically, it means a trust that is rooted entirely in the character of the one you are trusting, not in your own ability to hold on. Think of it like a legal trust. You hand over your assets to someone else because you believe they are utterly reliable.
Okay, I see.
And in times of severe adversity, David isn't listing off his own merits or his past victories. He relies entirely on divine favor. He describes God as a rock and a fortress.
A rock and a fortress.
Yeah, and to really grasp that, we have to understand the metaphor in its ancient geographical context. When David calls God a rock and a fortress, he is thinking of things like the impregnable rock of Gibraltar, or those ancient, massive strongholds in the mountains of En-Gedi and Adullam.
Oh, right, the caves.
Exactly. Those were literal cave systems in sheer cliff faces, where David actually hid from King Saul's armies. They weren't just pretty hills, they were unmovable realities where an enemy simply could not reach you.
To use a bit of a maritime analogy, it reminds me of what sailors call a sheet anchor.
A sheet anchor?
Yeah, it's the largest, heaviest anchor on a ship. It's the one you only deploy in the absolute worst emergencies, like when you are seconds away from being blown onto a reef.
Right, a last resort.
Exactly. But the secret of an anchor is that it doesn't hold a ship safe by its own weight. I mean, a heavy piece of iron just isn't enough to stop a massive ship in a hurricane.
That makes sense.
It holds the ship because of the immovable rock that it hooks into at the bottom of the ocean. So the trust isn't the power. The object of the trust is the power.
Oh, that is a brilliant way to visualize it. The anchor is completely useless without the rock.
Yeah.
And understanding that level of ultimate reliance leads us to one of the most monumental verses in all of Scripture.
Let's bring that up.
If you look at the text provided on the slide for Psalm 31, verse 5, it says, "Into thine hand I commit my spirit." These are incredibly weighty words with a massive historical echo.
I mean, those were the actual dying words of Jesus on the cross, weren't they?
They were, and the echo continues through history. These exact words were the dying declarations of early martyrs and great reformers like Polycarp, John Huss, and Martin Luther. Spurgeon notes that the object of the believer's greatest care in life and in death isn't their physical body or their financial estate. It's their spirit. Your spirit is your secret treasure, your most priceless jewel.
And what do you do with a priceless jewel when thieves are in the house? You entrust it to the hands of a faithful creator who is uniquely able to keep it safe.
Precisely. You put it in the ultimate vault.
But, it's easy to say, I trust God, when we're talking about the end of our lives or securing our eternal spirit. But what about, say, a random Tuesday morning when people are actively plotting against you?
Right, the day-to-day struggles.
Yeah, because verse 4 mentions enemies laying secret nets. How does relying on a massive rock actually protect you from a cunning, hidden trap?
Well, that is the daily reality of the spiritual battle. The text points out that our foes are often cunning rather than just overtly powerful. They don't always come at you with a sword.
What do they do instead?
Sometimes they act like a fowler, like a bird catcher, deftly laying a nearly invisible net so that simple, unsuspecting birds are suddenly surrounded. And you can't fight a net with brute strength.
No, the more you struggle, the more tangled you get, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But because God is that immovable rock, relying on his omnipotence acts like a blade that cuts the net entirely. Human or demonic policy weaves the snare, but God's intervening power is the only thing that can pull the captive out of those unseen, malicious traps.
So if we are anchored like that, and if God is cutting those nets, it really frees us up to do something radical. We can stop pretending.
How do you mean?
I mean, we can be brutally honest about how deeply we are suffering. Because we know the anchor holds, we don't have to fake a smile. And David gets remarkably visceral in the middle of this song.
He really does. He explores the profound physiological toll of grief. Let's look at the slide we have up for verse 9. David cries out, "Mine eye is consumed with grief."
And we usually have this tendency to over-spiritualize verses like this, don't we?
Oh, all the time.
We read that and think, oh, he's just feeling a bit sad and crying a lot. But reading the commentary, David is talking about literal physical decay here.
He is. Spurgeon actually includes a fascinating medical note here from a 19th century ophthalmic expert named George Critchett.
Wait, an eye doctor?
Yes. Critchett explains how severe, depressing mental grief can literally and physically damage the eye. He discusses a condition called glaucoma, noting that sudden, intense mental emotion can disturb the exact balance of fluid inside the eye.
That's terrifying.
It is. The eye loses its natural elasticity, it hardens, and a person can actually go completely blind from the inflammation and pressure brought on by intense sorrow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, David's spiritual and emotional pain was quite literally breaking down his physical body.
That is staggering. It is the concept of the body keeping the score, but centuries before modern psychology gave us the vocabulary for it.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about how your own body feels after a week of intense, unrelenting anxiety. The tension migraines, the gut issues, the sheer exhaustion. It is so validating to see Scripture acknowledge that spiritual burdens have a physical weight.
And for David, it's not just his body failing. His entire community collapses around him, too.
The social ruin is absolute. Verses 11 through 13 paint just a devastating picture. He says he is a reproach, treated like a broken vessel.
Like a shattered clay pot that you just sweep up and throw in the trash because it's useless now.
Exactly. And he says he is forgotten like a dead man out of mind.
The commentary points out that the milk of human kindness curdles very quickly when a despised believer is targeted by coordinated slander. David is actually compared to a wounded deer here.
A wounded deer.
Yes, and in nature, when a deer is wounded, the rest of the herd doesn't gather around to nurse it back to health. Instinct takes over. They turn against it and flee, terrified that the predator hunting their wounded companion will come for them next.
Oh, that's tragic.
David's neighbors fled from him as if he were highly contagious.
Imagine a time when you felt entirely isolated or misunderstood by your own community. Everyone backs away slowly because associating with you has suddenly become a liability.
It's a horrible feeling.
It's the ancient equivalent of being completely canceled, but with literal life or death stakes. When physical health fails so severely and society abandons you that completely, it feels like your life is in a terrifying freefall.
And that freefall is the exact tension of this text. When you are in that descent, how do you regain your footing?
Right. How do you?
You have to remember exactly who controls your destiny, and more specifically, who controls your time. Looking at the text provided on the slide for Psalm 31, verse 15, we find the pivotal realization of the entire psalm. David says, "My times are in thy hand."
My times, not just my ultimate eternity in heaven, but my actual day-to-day, minute-by-minute timeline on this earth.
Yes, the sovereign arbiter of destiny holds all the issues of our life. As one commentator put it beautifully, providence is an anodyne for care, a grave for despair.
Hold on, an anodyne. That sounds like a dusty bottle in a 19th century pharmacy. You mean it acts like a spiritual painkiller?
That's a perfect translation, yes. An anodyne soothes and numbs a sharp, agonizing pain. Trusting in God's providence soothes the sharp pain of anxiety. There is a striking, almost haunting story shared in the text from a writer named E. Paxton Hood.
Oh, I read this part. It's intense.
It is. He describes a patient in an insane asylum. This patient possessed a clear, sharp intelligence in many ways, but he was deeply disturbed by a specific fixation.
What was it?
Whenever he got his hands on a watch, even his absolute favorite watches, he would violently smash them against the stone floor of the asylum. When the doctors finally asked him why he constantly destroyed these things, he replied in sheer wide-eyed agony, "I could not bear the tick-tick-ticking."
The relentless, unstoppable ticking of time.
The agonizing countdown of a life that he felt he had absolutely no control over, the ticking mocked him. But the commentary contrasts that panic with the beautiful act of surrendering the watch to the hand of the maker.
Right.
When the watch is in the hand of the one who intricately designed the gears and measures out the moments, the ticking is no longer a source of psychological terror. It has purpose. The maker knows exactly when the alarm is supposed to ring.
You know, we constantly try to be the watchmakers of our own lives, don't we?
Oh, we definitely do.
We obsess over every single tick of time. You sit awake at 2 a.m. stressing about the timeline of your career, the timeline of a relationship, or just how long it's taking to heal from a betrayal.
Because we want to be in control.
We desperately want to control the gears inside the watch instead of just trusting the hand that holds it. But practically speaking, how does handing that watch over actually free us from the slander and the social ruin we were just talking about?
It frees you because it entirely shifts your audience. If your timeline, your reputation, and your ultimate vindication are held securely in God's hands, then the slanderers simply don't have the final say.
Oh, that's a good point.
The text notes that God hides his people in the secret of his presence, from the pride of man and the strife of tongues. When you grasp that, you realize you aren't just a piece of driftwood tossed on the ocean of fate. Your course is being steered by infinite wisdom.
That makes perfect sense conceptually, but I mean, it is incredibly hard to do in practice.
Of course.
Even when we know God holds our time, we are still human. We still have moments where the glaucoma of grief flares up, the ticking watch feels way too loud, and we panic. We speak out of turn.
We do.
And that brings us to David's remarkably honest confession of doubt and, honestly, God's surprising grace in response. Let's turn our attention to the slide for Psalm 31, verse 22.
Yes, David confesses, "I said in my haste, I am cut off from before thine eyes."
I said in my haste. I think every single person listening can relate to sending a hasty prayer of panic.
Oh, without a doubt.
It's the spiritual equivalent of sending an angry, despairing text message to God in the heat of the moment. You know, you've had a terrible week, the isolation is peaking, you're exhausted, and you just type out this message to the creator of the universe: "I'm done. You've clearly forgotten me. I am entirely cut off."
It is the universal human condition. The commentary rightly points out that unbelief always tries to find a dark corner in the firmest believer's heart, especially when the course of providence isn't moving as smoothly or as quickly as we desire.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, it was an unworthy, petulant speech from David.
Yeah.
But look at the very next word in that verse. Nevertheless.
Nevertheless, thou heardest the voice of my supplications. What an incredibly beautiful truth.
It really is. God pardons our hasty, panicked spirits.
That is such a comfort. God reads the angry text message. He sees the "I am cut off" in all caps, but he reads past the tone. He answers the underlying pain instead of punishing the bad attitude.
And that profound grace connects directly to what David marvels at just a few verses earlier. If we look at the text for Psalm 31, verse 19, David stands in awe of the goodness of God, which thou hast laid up for them that fear thee.
Laid up, like supplies in a storehouse.
Like a massive, heavily guarded storehouse. God is compared here to a provident, wealthy father who carefully reserves an inheritance for his children.
I love that image.
Heavenly mercy isn't just handed out all at once to be squandered. It is stored in the caskets of the promises and the granaries of providence. It is safely locked away, just waiting to be revealed at the exact moment the ticking watch dictates we need it most.
So if God has this massive storehouse of goodness laid up for us, and if he is patient enough to handle our hasty, panicked moments, how does that reality change the way you and I walk out our front door tomorrow morning?
It changes your posture entirely. It moves you from a defensive crouch of fear into a posture of absolute courage. Which brings us to the final exhortation of the psalm.
Okay, let's hear it.
Since God protects us in his pavilion, Since he holds the ticking watch of our times, and since he forgives our hasty words, there is really only one logical, rational response for the believer. We must live with profound courage.
Let's read that final call to action. We have Psalm 31, verse 24 on the screen. Be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart.
But we need to define courage carefully here, because Spurgeon makes a crucial distinction. Courage in the biblical sense isn't just having a stern look on your face.
Or using big, aggressive words, right?
Exactly, or having a roaring voice. True Christian courage is described beautifully as the undaunted audacity of a sanctified heart.
Undaunted audacity. That's a powerful phrase. But what does it look like in real life?
Spurgeon compares it to a rock, an adamant that faces the scorching sun, the driving rain, the intense heat, and the freezing snow, without ever blushing, shrinking, or changing its complexion. It is entirely unbothered by the weather.
You know, it reminds me less of a tree trying to weather a storm and more of a massive steel load-bearing pillar in the center of a skyscraper.
The load-bearing pillar.
Yeah. The wind hits the building, the weight of the floors above is immense, and the circumstances outside are chaotic. But that pillar doesn't buckle or sway, not because it's somehow trying really hard to be brave, but simply because of what it's made of and where it is anchored deep in the bedrock.
Exactly. And the bedrock, according to verse 23 on your slide, is rooted entirely in the love of God. The verse starts, "O love the Lord, all ye his saints."
That is the source material for the pillar.
Yes. The courage doesn't come from hyping yourself up in the mirror every morning. The text says that God literally administers force to our very fountain of vitality when we venture out for him. He takes his own unending power and injects it into our frail hearts.
If true courage isn't the absence of fear, but rather an active reliance on the strength God actively puts into us, what does that practically look like for you this week? Think about the ticking watch of your own life right now. The timeline you've been losing sleep over, the slander or misunderstanding you simply cannot control, or the hasty, panicked words you regret saying. What would it actually look like to consciously hand that watch back to the master today, knowing your times are entirely in his hands?
That is a wonderful thought to leave off on.
Thank you for listening to the Pilgrim's Rest channel. You're welcome to like, subscribe, comment, and share it with fellow pilgrims around you so that we can support and encourage one another on this journey of faith. Hope to see you next time.